Alive.
We are live, and Olivia got a whole screen up from renewable energy. You asked to come in and give us kind of a prep on storage and some testimony on, I think our whole taxing thing is what we're looking at, but the whole electric storage issue. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I'm glad you guys were at least able to get a short break this afternoon because I know you're in a marathon session here. For the record, my name is Olivia Campbell Anderson. It's my pleasure to lead Renewable Energy Vermont. For folks that aren't familiar with REV, our members are the companies, utilities, and individuals that are creating resilient local economy powered by renewable energy. We employ a 21st century workforce that's committed to improving the lives of our neighbors and our communities. And we're all working together to achieve 100% total renewable energy, renewable electricity, renewable heating, cooling, and transportation. And energy storage is a key component of that. Let's see, can I advance slide? There we go. I also just want to say, you all know, because many of you were the architects of a lot of the state policy around energy and renewable energy. And you know that state policy drove, and it still today very much drives Vermont's clean energy future. And the policy that you set on electricity wisely, it enabled growth. We now have 6,114 jobs in renewable electricity in Vermont. And we have 471 jobs in energy storage in Vermont. So energy storage needs to grow, but it is certainly an emerging and growing sector of Vermont's economy, and certainly a future necessary element of our energy system, particularly when it comes to resilience. It's also a critical component for cutting climate pollution. You know, when we cut climate pollution, we create jobs in Vermont. Every renewable energy installation, every energy storage installation that happens in Vermont are jobs and money that stays in Vermont in our energy system. So I want to also just leave you with the theme that renewable energy technology has matured, and energy storage is part of that maturing. It's our energy system is now very dynamic. It's much more price competitive for renewables, and sort of the past state policy is not the present state policy or the future. We need to continue to evolve with our regulation and our policy moving forward as well. So I'm going to couple outlines of what I'm going to discuss, sort of the needs and benefits of energy storage, what's going on in other states on energy storage, suggested amendments and essential elements of the miscellaneous energy bill, House Bill 431, and a couple other miscellaneous energy issues. So you probably have experienced some of this yourself, knowing that Vermont's experiencing more frequent and intense storms due to climate change, which already is here, reducing our electricity reliability and increasing costs for everyone. Vermont faces real and substantial costs on our electric system due to the impact of extreme weather and different weather events than we've had in the past. More frequent, wetter, more severe, and a lot of microstorm, wind events, etc. are happening. Direct storm costs and customer interruptions due to electricity outages cost Vermonters more than $375 million over the last 5 years. And that equals about $285 for every GMP customer. So to put this in that figure in context, I know you guys are money people, but a lot of times when you hear these figures, it's hard to get it in context. That number is only equal to about a quarter of the state's annual transportation fund budget. So our existing grid is also grossly inefficient. When we think about how the electricity that we lose every time we are importing from many miles, states, regions, even countries away, the electric grid is only about 43% efficient, and it's pretty vulnerable. I mean, we are dealing with grandpa's grid. No offense to grandpa, but in terms of technology, that's where we are. The Vermont, you may know, imports 60% of its electricity. We are importing electricity 100% of the time, but we consume about 4 times as much energy as we produce overall. Sending hundreds of $millions out of the state every year. And we know that we could generate at least 50% of our electricity that we need in the state with renewable technology that's available today. So let's talk a little bit more about renewable storage and the specific benefits. I know that you got a little overview as well from Ann Margolis from the Department of Public Service, but just some key reminders of what we're talking about and why this is necessary. We're going to think about renewable energy storage like your Swiss Army knife in electricity, and it presents the state with a lot of opportunity, particularly to create resilience through the use of local renewable electricity and storage. We could increase Vermont's ability to withstand and recover quickly from these extreme weather events, lower storm recovery costs, which are very real costs on the energy system, and increase overall system reliability and efficiency, as well as lower the costs that utilities have to pay to the region, ISO New England, when they're importing all of that electricity. But we need to plan now to start to support the future that's necessary to meet our climate commitments and get this sustainability for resilient homes, businesses, because as we electrify more with our electric vehicles, cold climate heat pumps, really the mantra is you need to electrify everything as fast as you can right now, and then add in advanced wood heating and we'll be set to go for resilience and climate. But work needs to be done to keep and capture this local economic opportunity in Vermont. And sort of this list here shows, all the benefits that energy storage provides Vermonters, and it can provide you many of these benefits even if you don't have a battery storage system in your house, with the exception of some of the backup power, but there's technology exists to create microgrids, and we have a couple of those in Vermont that are Green Mountain Power pilot projects, but we need much more of them. So you might be familiar when I mentioned maximizing our existing renewables. The state and private citizens have made great investments in local renewable electricity, and we are ready to make the sun shine at night. But our state policy has not caught up to that. You can see this graph of sort of how does that work. So you've got energy consumption happening during the day. This is just an example on solar. And then oftentimes our peaks now, we have been so successful with energy efficiency and also with local small-scale solar deployment that what we're going to want to do is save some of that electricity and use it in the evening time during our peak. For the summer, our peak is in the evening. During the winter, we are still experiencing some daytime peaks depending on what utility you're in. But we can take that surplus electricity, store it in a battery so it's available at nighttime, so you can rely on local solar at night, rely on that sunshine at night. And this is just more about the benefits of critical backup power. We really want to think about our hazard preparedness plans, emergency preparedness plans, with having storage at hospitals, in schools for first responders, and so forth like that, in critical community facilities. It helps ratepayers save money. You know, you'll hear, I'm sure at some time from Green Mountain Power, the millions upon millions of dollars they're saving every year now by using energy storage with their pilot projects. You know, boost jobs here in Vermont. You might not realize Vermont is actually a hub for energy storage manufacturing and development. We have several companies that are manufacturing energy storage equipment here. Dynapower in South Burlington, Northern Power, which is out now called WEG in Barrie, and Northern Reliability in Waterbury. They are exporting, most of their equipment gets exported all over the world, and they've been doing this for years. And it would be great if they could provide more of those tools and more of that equipment here in Vermont. We're not really taking advantage of what we've got, but this is also a whole economic sector that we could and should grow, building on our existing assets. And then maximizing integration of local renewables is a tremendous opportunity to build upon and take advantage of investments we've already made. So this is a picture just to help get some visuals. I think folks, we all watched in horror what was going on in Texas when the lights went out and people couldn't have clean water. They couldn't heat their homes, etc. When you think about energy storage, if you pair it with local solar, it keeps the lights and the heat on, it will keep Vermonters working, and it keeps vulnerable people alive. Keeping electricity on for many individuals, particularly in the winter times and even in summer times, is becoming a life or death issue for vulnerable populations. You may not know, you know, it doesn't often make the news, but Vermont also has had warmer summers, and we have had heat deaths by seniors now in the summertime in Vermont. And so this picture shows what, you know, this is a neighborhood in Texas, and that one house that has the lights on and it's still operating, they have solar plus storage. And this is what we need to aim for Vermonters as well, to reduce our vulnerability and be safe. I'm going to switch to talk about what's going on in other states. You know, a lot of what you've heard previously is, how do we regulate storage? What are we going to do about it? Things are happening, but the state actually hasn't done much of anything to encourage energy storage, unfortunately. We're quite behind the ball when it comes to state policies and programs and initiatives. And so I just want to highlight some things that other states are doing. Massachusetts, New York, California, Nevada, Oregon, New Jersey are all requiring energy storage procurement by their utilities. They've set very specific targets. There's legislation working its way through Connecticut and Maine right now to do the same. Several states offer incentives for energy storage. So we do appreciate, as you think about those ARPA funds going into the Clean Energy Development Fund to support microgrids and energy storage, particularly for vulnerable communities and individuals where the market is not naturally serving those folks. In California, all new homes are required to install solar, and now they're moving to have solar and storage. So they're storage ready. More than a dozen states have now on the books laws or specific plans for 100% renewable electricity, low income incentives and support, updated interconnection rules to encourage energy storage. and allowing in Massachusetts, energy storage qualifies for energy efficiency incentives because it's really an energy management tool as well. This is a visual that shows you what's going on. And I really, with the procurement targets in other states, the reason I want to show this as a visual, and I asked you to cue in on New England, much like Vermont led on energy efficiency, and then other states followed us, other states, unfortunately, we've got the reverse going on with energy storage. Other states are leading on energy storage, and essentially whoever gets the most will pay the least for their electricity and transmission costs. And as you can see, Vermont is becoming an island of lack of activity in the state policy arena. And what the result of that is going to be that we are going to be left paying higher transmission costs than other states in New England, because they are going to be better managing their systems, and they will be more resilient and ready for climate related weather events. So we really want to think about this as an impact of what's happening to us because we have not taken state policy leadership on storage and what impact that's going to have on ratepayers in the future. I also did mention storage incentives. Dozens of states are offering specific storage incentives. So I encourage you to think about that when you're working on finalizing the budget in ARPA. So I already mentioned things that have happened with energy storage in Vermont. Here's a couple of snapshots. Whether, on the right side, we're manufacturing. This is Dynapower's headquarters in South Burlington, and a young woman there on the manufacturing floor. This middle picture, energy storage is also a critical tool for connectivity and communications. There was a pilot program where Northern Reliability provided storage and solar backup for our communication systems and our communications towers. And so this should be done for every new investment, and it's a critical area. And on the bottom corner, you have there the governor signing and seeing the State House battery system container, and the top right, a power wall that's in the basement of a woman's home. These things are happening, but unfortunately, they're largely just one-offs. We don't have a statewide policy and a consistency to encourage consumers and also drive market and the innovation. So turning now to the legislation. House Bill 431. I want to, there's a couple of key elements I want to tune in to and ask that you consider some amendments. And that specifically is around energy storage permitting and fairness on the timing and the process. Tax clarity and certainty. This is an area where, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, needs to be addressed. And the definition of single plant, and how making sure that we are consistent. It's a miscellaneous energy issue that I mentioned, consistent with the legislature's intent for smart siting and town energy planning, and clarifying the regulatory language around storage aggregation. So I want to speak a moment to the permitting process and fairness. So much of the legislation that you see before you from the House came from compromise and hours of hard work and negotiation by all the parties. I have to say, I'm actually extremely disheartened and disappointed that there was conflicting testimony shared by the Public Utility Commission to the Senate Finance Committee, as was shared before the House. We thought we had worked out all of this language to create certainty. Overall, this bill is doing many things. You're setting regulation on energy storage in an area that is far more complex and more expensive in terms of both the time and the process for permitting than exists for a fossil fuel generator. And we're essentially talking about the same thing. And so I would encourage you to maintain the fairness and the certainty in the timing on permits within 30 days. This is not something where it's, as you can see, I've got some pictures of some projects here so you can get a sense of scale of what really are we talking about. So for the lower end of projects, where the PUC, well, you have to get a certificate for public good for anything that is 100 kilowatts and up. And the 100 kilowatt to 1 megawatt is really what we consider the small business commercial scale system. And 120 megawatt, 120 kilowatt system was like the size of 4 filing cabinets. It's not big, it's pretty small, and it's going to be most always inside a basement for that kind of project. I don't really know what concern Agency of Natural Resources would have with someone putting something like this in their basement. And I have to tell you, there is no permit for putting a similar, like in a fossil fuel generator. And we really want people to use storage instead of fossil fuel generators because it's quieter, it's safer, it's much more efficient, and it's climate friendly. And so it just really, for the up to 1 megawatt, this picture on the bottom right that you see, this is a facility that's outside. This is a megawatt that was installed by EDF Renewables. This happens to be in California. And you can see it's, like a small shed. It's not a very big area we're talking about here. And so for consistency with other types of state permits, just so that you know, there are other examples in statute where there are specific permit timelines and deadlines, unless there is a substantive issue of concern. So telecom, 60 days, make a decision or have some hearings. In town and municipal zoning, state law requires that permits be deemed issued or action taken on them within 30 days. So the language that's in the bill that the House passed around permitting timing is not odd or inconsistent or unreasonable. If we need to tweak the number of days to allow for more time, that's, we could talk about that. But I want to, for net metering projects of similar size, it's 15 days. And so here you're offering in the legislation double the amount of time. And much like with net metering, if there is any issue at all, any party, any state agency can say, hey, I've got a concern, hold up, let's talk about it, or we need to have a hearing, we need to work out this issue, then that deadline does not apply anymore by the way this is written. So it's only if there's no issues, it's deemed permitted, move on. If there is an issue, you don't have to work out the issue in 30 days. You just have to raise your hand and say, hey, I've got an issue. And then the PUC has an existing process that they will go through for having hearings and discussion and so forth. So please keep that language in as passed by the House. Next, I want to talk a little bit about tax clarity and certainty. So this is an area, much like other elements of this bill, where, as you know, with businesses, tax certainty and consistency is really a necessary element to enable project financing, appropriate contract terms, and encourage deployment of this new resilient energy infrastructure that can really create meaningful cost savings for all electric ratepayers. Vermont law does not address state education or real property taxes for energy storage. It's just a gap. So I appreciate the introduction of Senate Bill 128 and look forward to you taking that up in earnest here with this legislation as it's related. And it might seem odd, like, okay, wait a minute, Olivia, you're coming to us saying, please tax us. This proposal actually increases revenue to the state, but we're asking you to create certainty because the uncertainty is actually increasing the cost of these projects because we have to account for worst case scenario and pay for that risk in the financing. So it's increasing the cost of the projects and discouraging deployment of them because we don't know what the tax rate's going to be. And so we can't set proper contract terms and rates. I hope you'll hear from Vermont Electric Co-op. They have a project that's been impacted by this. But this is one thing where it's a barrier that could be addressed by creating consistent property tax treatment for energy storage projects. And certainty for new solar plus storage energy projects, and clarifying that, the initial legislative intent was that these projects not impact the underlying land value assessments because that is already considered in the property tax on the equipment for energy storage. And in the tax that if this passes will come for the production value. So we just need the certainties to simplify the assessment process and increase state and local revenue and administrative costs. So I hope that you'll hear from Vermont Electric Co-op on this. REV and VEC are supporting this amendment. We've had on the tax legislation, we've had conversations with the tax department, and I believe they saw some drafting errors and wanted to suggest some amendments to get the correct language and the intent here. So I hope that you'll hear from them and we can work with you on this tax issue in the legislation. And then I feel like I'm going on for a long time. I want to go through one final element around other issues of amendments to consider.
Yeah, we've got 5 more minutes. So,
great. Okay. So the last one I want to discuss here is the definition of plant. As I mentioned, you all know we've been through, spent a lot of time on getting siting right for renewable energy projects. And in doing so, there's been tremendous amount of work happening at regional and town plans. And many towns have actually identified areas where they're like, all right, we think this is the best area. We want to have a solar park. We want all of our solar to go in this area. Or they've done the smart growth and they're doing their planning. And there is a situation where how the Public Utility Commission is interpreting the definition of what is a plant, meaning a single facility or multiple facilities. That definition, we believe, needs to be updated in the law to be consistent with legislature's intent and smart siting, so that you could have multiple projects in a similar location, like an industrial park, i.e. like a solar park, but they're not the same facility. And it gives more clarity around this definition that's in the statute of what does a single facility mean, and details on interconnection, that, even something as simple as existing utility lines. It doesn't make any sense to run multiple 3-phase power lines to projects in the same area. You're going to use the same line because can be used and it's the most cost-effective thing, but this definition needs to be updated to make that clear. So here is some language that we suggest you consider. And then I also have a list. I want to flag last item really that the policies, as I mentioned, on renewables have become a bit stale. The standard offer program is concluding next year. And so I hope you will hear from the standard offer facilitator. Standard offer is the most cost-effective, price competitive way to get new renewable energy projects in the state of Vermont. And so it is a reverse auction system so that you always get the lowest price. It doesn't incorporate energy storage. So I encourage you to think about like a 2 or 3 year extension on standard offer and incorporate energy storage. And then any of the measures that you passed last session around updating the grid and getting good information about where the best places to locate are on the grid system to save us costs. Any questions? I really appreciate your time. I know it's late in the afternoon and this is a lot of material.
Okay, if you can take that down, Olivia, I can see the committee. Any questions, Senator Bray, and then Senator McDonald?
One quick question. So I'm interested in learning more about grid efficiency. Could you send me the citation for the 43%? It just, because I've always heard of figures in the 90 percentile. So I'm not
sure. I'll send you those citations, and it actually comes from Green Mountain Power about our own grid.
Okay. Well, it's, I don't want to engage in wishful thinking. I've always
That's the inside Vermont grid. That's probably our
distribution and transmission system.
Yeah.
Sort of like line losses that we experience.
Sure. Okay. And then the other one on the plant definition. So my experience with 174 has been that when people want to do net metering projects, they run into the 500 kW limit. And so they end up with multiple 500 kW projects near each other. And because that's the limit, that's why they have separate connections, they're independent, et cetera. But that plant definition, people wouldn't be running into it if they were building 2 megawatts all at once, as opposed to 5 400s. And so my sense is it's an artifact of people choosing net metering over standard offer or
Senator
a power
Gray,
purchase agreement.
I'm going to cut you off because this is really more the bailiwick of energy, of natural resources and energy. And I'm looking forward to shifting most of this non-tax related to you. And we've got one more witness who is already with us. So I want to limit this to the tax implications, and then we will happily ship the recommendations over to energy to work on, because we just—
Yes, and Senator Bray, perhaps I could connect with you offline on more of those questions. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Any questions on the taxing section? Olivia, we have an amendment to this which would tax storage the same as we tax solar, which is on its output. Is that acceptable?
Yes. And so I think you'll probably want to hear from the tax department when we were talking with them about this language, they noted there was some tweaks that needed to be made. But yes, we were looking just for consistent treatment.
Okay, and then we'll take a look at the other tax suggestions that you've made before we get this one out the door, which I'm hoping to do sooner rather than later. Just because we're not kicking them out as fast as they seem to be coming in. And that's just starting, Senator Bray.
So I do have an air traffic control question. Are you planning on having the bill committed down the hall to natural?
This bill?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Well, that's one, I'm just wanted to check because you were saying, well, some of those issues are related to energy.
They are. I don't know, if you can get them done, we can amend them to this bill, but this committee's not going to be set up to looking at all of the energy related
Okay,
issues.
I just wanted to make sure I knew what was in our
If
in
you
basket.
want it, we'll amend it and send it to you. We'll make it work. Senator Pearson? No? Okay. All right. Any questions at this point? All right. Then we're going to go on to another fun topic.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Okay. And yeah, Olivia, we have the copies, I'm sure, of that slide presentation, so we can refer back to it. The question, last Friday, we got the briefing from Global Foundries and Green Mountain Power on their proposal to the Public Utility Commission. Some members of the committee are somewhat disturbed. And there's been a lot of talk, but I thought before we talked anymore or got exercised anymore, we might find out what the legal framework is. We didn't want to talk to the PUC because they have a request pending. But we thought the department might be able to tell us under what authority is this going in? Is it being considered? Is that acceptable? And what, if any, power does the legislature have in this point in the process? I'm just coming out of planning and zoning, and if you change the zoning rules, anything already filed goes through under the old set of rules. So I thought, Commissioner, you're back. Welcome back. And Mr. Porter, we've seen more of you in the last 2 days than I think in the last 2 years. So welcome back. And the floor is yours.
All right. It's a pleasure to be here again. June Tierney, Commissioner, Department of Public Service, for the record. With me is Jim Porter, our Director for Public Advocacy. He's also here to keep an eye on me because, as you just pointed out, Chair Cummings, this is an active proceeding before the PUC, and the department is appearing on behalf of ratepayers and the public in that proceeding. Jim is directing that case. And so we just have to make sure that I don't say anything that prejudices his advocacy. So if he suddenly bats me down, that's why he's talking. To go to the two concerns here, I think it's helpful to step back a little bit and to remember that the legislature has done a lot of work in the energy space in the last 30 years, and it seems to be accelerating. And you've done an immense amount of work, if that's possible, to improve on how much you've done in the last 10 years. And it seems more and more in the last 5 years and 1 year. And something you were getting at, Chair Cummings, last week that I thought was right on point is it has been so long since anybody has thought about establishing a utility in this state. And so that's just not something you think about every day. And given the amount of work that's gone into establishing our renewable energy policies and our grid modernization and the like, it stands to reason that there are pathways we just haven't walked down in the regulatory world yet that have not intersected with that policy work. And I think that may be where some of Senator Bray's concerns were coming from. So to just go over the framework briefly, you have two actors here. You've got GMP and you've got Global Foundries. Global Foundries is GMP's largest customer. Global Foundries, if memory serves, is the only customer that takes its present service under a certain tariff at GMP. They are basically in a class by themselves. And as this committee well remembers, Global Foundries and its predecessor, IBM, for many years has been singled out whether through energy efficiency by being a self-managed energy efficiency utility, or by having what the statute refers to as a special contract, which is a rate that GMP and the company have negotiated that has been reviewed by the PUC and the department and then approved by order by the PUC. So what has happened here now is, after many years of having a special contract rate with GMP in the service territory, Global Foundries has been examining whether there are other ways to reduce their energy costs in the state, because the company reports that these are significant costs, and they have other facilities in the region, notably in New York State, where their electricity costs, frankly, are something like half as high. It costs half as much for them to take their energy and do their manufacturing. So a couple of years ago, when GMP was in for a rate case, one of the outcomes of that rate case after Global Foundries intervened was, as part of the order, was for those two to go off and to examine what other pathways there might be for Global Foundries to better manage its energy costs. And so the parties have been doing that, and they came to a memorandum of understanding that resulted in what's called this virtual utility framework. And so that is what's been put before the PUC for review. That is what the department is actively reviewing as well. And as I said at the outset, there are two frameworks here that have to be considered. One is GMP's service territory, because Global Foundries is squarely within GMP's service territory. And under existing law, utilities can ask the PUC to adjust their service territory. And there are several factors that go into that. That's under 30 VSA 249. And one of those factors, the fifth one, is if it's in the interests of consumers. That's something that the PUC is supposed to consider. And in this instance, as I understand the theory of the case, Global Foundries and GMP are saying that it's in the interest of Vermont consumers for them to work out this deal by which Global Foundries leaves GMP's service territory and becomes a self-managed utility. And I should add, a self-managed utility that has no distribution customers. They don't sell energy to anybody. What they're doing is using transmission lines that are owned by Velco to access the wholesale market and make their own procurements. And from Global Foundries' point of view, as far as I understand it, they're confident that they can manage their procurements such that their costs go down significantly. So the companion piece to this Section 249 petition that GMP has made to change its service territory and carve Global Foundries out of it is that Global Foundries is petitioning for a Section 231 CPG that allows it to do business as a utility in Vermont. And as I said a moment ago, it would be a utility that has no customers, which is an important consideration because historically, at least, the point of regulation of utilities has been to protect consumers from monopolistic behavior and to ensure that rates are just and reasonable. And when you don't have any customers because of the nature of how you're set up, then those concerns are not really front and center. However, with the way our energy policy has evolved, and this goes to Senator Bray's concerns, we have a lot of expectations for what utilities will do when it comes to the makeup of their power portfolio, the characteristics of the power that they have, their efficiency in using power, things that are very familiar to all of us today, but that 15 years ago were not quite as front and center. We've simply evolved. And so those are the very issues that the department is flagging in its review. And I think that the PUC is a good forum for those things to be reviewed to see whether it makes sense, whether the public interest, whether consumer interest would be well served by this arrangement being approved. And as we sit here today, that is an open question. So to your concerns about what you could do at this point, I would offer the following observations. One, I think I've given this opinion to you many times before. It is not advisable, I think, to intervene in open dockets. There are legal considerations that attend, and I would ask you to consult with legislative counsel about that if you want to get into greater details. But you have statutory processes that have created due process rights. And when the petition was filed, at least the procedural rights have become vested interests for Global Foundries and Green Mountain Power. So to disturb that now statutorily through new legislation, I think would open a can of worms, to say the least. But on the other hand, there is the idea of generally applicable laws. And what's interesting here is that Global Foundries is asking to become a utility. And if that is granted, if they're given a Section 231 CPG, that renders them subject to laws of general applicability to utilities. And that's where you would then have your opportunity, and this is to Senator Pearson's point, that to do something about the arrangement if you concluded that the PUC got it wrong, basically. And at this time, we don't know what that outcome is going to be. But I would suggest this because I know that Senator Bray was quite concerned about this. When it comes to something like the renewable energy standard, that law as presently written pertains to a retail electricity provider. That's how the statute is written as we speak. And clearly, if Global Foundries becomes a utility in its own right, and they're not selling energy to customers, they would not fall under the common understanding of what a retail electricity provider is. And so that would be the kind of law of general applicability that you might want to look at. But with that said, the particulars of this arrangement are such that the parties have attempted to put together a glide path for this this separation, if you will. And that glide path is, as I understand it, directed at protecting consumers from the shock of this changed set of circumstances. And the department will be looking at whether that protection is adequate or not. But it bears noting that at the end of the day, Global Foundries is not obliged to do business in Vermont. They're not obliged to take service from Green Mountain Power. They can simply choose to leave. And there's a countervailing policy that the legislature has adopted that has to be weighed here. And that's under 30 VSA 218E, where state policy is also supposed to be directed at retaining and recruiting for manufacturing and other businesses. So that's the long and the short of it. If you've got questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Okay, I've got Senator Pearson and then Senator Bray. And,
Commissioner Tierney
and Senator McDonald can't hear me. All right.
and Senator Sorokin seems to be.
And Senator Sorokin. Okay.
Commissioner Tierney, as I understand it, the legislature has been asked this specific question about IBM and neglected to permit this sort of scenario that is now being contemplated at the PUC. Is that your understanding?
It is not. I did hear that that exchange with Senator McDonald, and my recollection is that years ago it was about power procurement, their ability to make their own purchases. This is about transforming themselves into a utility. Does that make sense? In other words, at the time, they were looking for leave to buy their own power directly from the wholesale market. Period.
But you've just spent great pains explaining to us that they have no customers. So how is that any different if they?
I would have to go back and look at what exactly happened 15 years ago. But my point is that what they're asking to do today to turn themselves into a utility in their own right, to my knowledge, they did not do that 15 years ago. It's not unprecedented. We had AMIA for years that was a utility as well, though they actually were a marble enterprise, I think a manufacturer, we'll call them, in CVPS's service territory. But and AMIA, and they also owned generation equipment. And AMIA actually had customers that they distributed some power to. So they were a utility, though their principal business wasn't to be a utility, it was to work in the marble area. And I think what Global Foundries is doing is taking that example and going a step beyond and saying, we're going to be a self-contained utility too, and we're not going to have any customers. So that's, in other words, this, as far as I know, is actually a question of first impression under Vermont law.
And I don't think 15 years ago that they went to the Public Service Board. They came to the legislature.
Right. And
I think that's correct.
This is an important point. They, as I understand the history, and I don't have any firsthand knowledge, they came to the legislature wanting to, as you've said, be direct purchasers of electricity on the grid, on the market. And the legislature said no. And the reason that I think that's relevant is you've just basically told us that it would be unwise for us to pass the legislation at this point because there's an active case in front of the PUC. But there was no notice for that. So we didn't have, we are left observing the bureaucratic process that exists to handle potentially these kinds of questions, but really a question that far exceeds the imagination of the underpinning structure. And at the same time, because so as soon as they file that, your assertion, and you're not alone, is that we should butt out.
I would never put it that way, Senator Pearson.
Well, you're more polite than I am.
I would not.
What we're getting at.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm just curious, since the legislature has no means effectively of weighing in once we learn that this is being contemplated, but we do have a history with something very similar coming before us, and not us, but the legislature at the time deciding no. I'm wondering if that influences the administration's approach to this, or should influence it, or would it be fair to basically say we don't have much to go on? We do know that a similar question put before the legislature at the time was not granted, and shouldn't that inform the posture at least? Otherwise, what is the point, kind of any of that record?
Yeah. So really, Senator, there's a lot in there to unpack, and I really want to begin by assuring you of the department's. I'm not joking. The department would never say to you, "butt out." What I mean is that, legally speaking, this legislature has set up an independent quasi-judicial body that functions like a court. And there are due process rights that attach to litigants who appear in that forum. That's a function of the very law that this legislature has passed.
And I'm not quarreling with that.
Right.
I'm being cheeky about how I phrase it. This legislature also contemplated something similar.
Well, if I may, this is where details really matter. And I would highly recommend that you have legislative counsel look into that, because similar isn't good enough. Existing law either prescribes things or permits things. And this petition has been filed pursuant to existing law that, at least on its face, would appear to permit what they want to do. It may well be that upon review and with advocacy from parties in the proceeding, that the PUC concludes that no, in fact, existing law does not permit this. And it may well be that part of the advocacy that is brought before the PUC is a resurrection of the history you're pointing to say, they tried this once before under Vermont law, and it was not deemed permissible then. But that's all part of the litigation process. And to your point a moment ago, where you said there was no notice, with the deepest respect, that's not so. The notice provisions of a court were followed. To my knowledge, we certainly received notice of it. It was posted in the PUC's EPSB, or their electronic case management file. Notice, as a matter of to the world, as they put it in the law, was given. I think the issue is that the legislature doesn't typically litigate in an administrative forum or in courts. And so I hear your point that you feel like you're observing But I would point out that the department is here today having this conversation with you, hearing your concerns. And from our perspective, those are all things that a public advocate weighs and considers in putting together its advocacy. But I have to be clear that legal research will give us the answer as to whether we're talking about a point in the past that was similar or that was directly on point. And that is highly relevant in judging this particular case.
And I can't remember if we actually turned it down. I remember discussions. I don't know that there was ever a bill that was specifically voted down and on what conditions. And it sounds like our concern, other than our peak that nobody asked us, our real concerns are the environmental ones. And because I don't know if any of us care if there's another utility, as long as it's going to act like all the other utilities. If this, and that may be, I'm sure that's going to be part of the discussion, and maybe that's a good thing for natural resources and energy to talk about, and perhaps have a discussion with the department as they proceed through putting their case together.
I would add too, Madam Chair, that I have noticed in recent years that legislative committees increasingly are sending letters to the PUC, making their concerns known. And that most certainly remains an option for you as well. And, without compromising their right of confidentiality, I think I can comfortably say that the PUC, at least in my day, was never dismissive of public comment. These are things that they read very carefully and take very seriously. So to the extent that you feel that the legislature would want to weigh in on something like this, as I said, my understanding is that this is a case of first impression in Vermont on their facts. It would be perfectly well within your rights to do that.
Senator Hart. I had Senator Bray first, and then Senator Sirotkin, and then Senator Hardy. Okay, Senator Bray.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Tierney. Thanks for coming in. It's always, this is an interesting puzzle in front of us. I'll go, I just want to follow up, but this is not a big point, but when you said that there was notice given, the only, maybe I've missed something. When I was on EPUC reading up, the notice as best I could see is that once they filed, there was notice, as in, and then other parties could file whether or not they wanted to participate as parties. So, but if the administratively complete, the date is the date of the petition filing, then the door closed the moment notice, it was filing the petition, as best I can tell, that constituted triggering a notice requirement in order to gain party status. But the rights were already, if someone's going to assert that they're vested rights as of the date of application, then the date of application and the day they file are one and the same thing. So I don't know really how we get involved, not that we're looking to become parties in the proceeding.
Well, fair enough, Senator, but what you're now tackling is the body of law around vested rights and notice, and that's yet a bigger can of worms. Sure. Where I really urge you to speak with legislative counsel about it. Sure. But in a nutshell, what you've described is exactly how the American legal process works. Okay. The entity that seeks to avail itself of its legal rights in a forum does so because the law existed before the date of the filing. They relied on the law as it existed in preparing their petition and the like. And when they filed it, assuming that they followed all of the appointed filing requirements of the PUC, that became their due process right. that they have now filed a petition and they are entitled to have it decided under law as it existed the day they filed. The notice provisions that went out to the world in terms of intervention and the like are exactly that. They're intended to give people notice that here's your opportunity to weigh in. The
Right.
fact of the filing is what provides notice to the world at large that this issue is in play.
Right.
And that's pretty much how it works.
Okay. Well, right. So live and learn. But the filing, in a way, could create problems if the legislature sees a problem that it wants to address. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. So in Section 231 of Title 30, when someone wants to formulate a business that comes under the jurisdiction of the PUC, they come before the commission and file a petition that says whether, and the commission determines whether or not, quote, the operation of such business will promote the general good of the state.
Yes.
And then, so this is, I'm not asking you to address this petition in particular because I know you're going to be participating in it, but much of the petition itself addresses, and you alluded to it yourself, the cost of operation for this particular business in this particular state. So I'm trying to square a case that seems to build on relatively higher costs here in Vermont compared to the underlying test of whether or not it promotes the general good of the state.
Yeah.
So can you help me understand how pleading in one way has any connection to the general good of the state provision in 231?
So first, I would want to say, Senator Bray, that I am not here to make Global Foundries' case and GMP's case. So that's really something that I would think the proceeding before the PUC would explore, and something that we will be looking at. But as a general matter, the way I might look at this is to say, is the creation, or better said, is the licensing of this particular entity to be a utility in the public good? Well, what is it directed at? Among other things, it's directed at preserving this company's ability to stay in the state. That is a legitimate consideration under 218E. It is also a legitimate criteria for the PUC to examine under Section 249, subpoint 5, I think it is, where the PUC is to consider, in looking at the configuration of a utility service territory, whether that particular configuration is in the interest of consumers. And so the argument would go that it's in the interest of consumers, the interest of ratepayers, for Global Foundries to continue to be in Vermont and to be a self-managed utility. That's the theory of the case, and that's the proof that would have to be had before the PUC.
Okay. And so in this case, again, I'm not particularly, we could say this is the Acme Electric Company. They were making fireworks, now they're going to bring in their own power. So a self-managed utility doesn't, as best I can tell, does not exist in statute. So it's a novel variety of utility, just like it receives power, but actually has no customers, which is another very fine-edged distinction, since it wouldn't make sense to have power without consuming it. So anyway, it's novel, but I don't know how do you interpret something that isn't provided for? Yeah. Self-managed utility,
Yeah.
when we don't name such a thing, how do you look at a reinterpretation?
Well, again, I think these are things that you should explore with legislative counsel, but speaking as a clinician, that is exactly what it means to have the implied powers of a court. Statutes are not always explicit or express. Statutes at times have to be read in pari materie. They have to be read together to make sense of them. And then at the end of the day, the role for the judge, in this case the PUC, is to ascertain whether it makes sense to read these statutes this way or not. And as I agree with you, as I said a moment ago, this is a question of first impression. And if I had to guess, I would say the concept probably came from the SMEET program, which is the self-managed energy efficiency program. And so you put the two labels together and you get self-managed utility. But you're quite right. This is not a species of utility that is called out in statute. And the test here is to determine, does the law reasonably allow this reading to create a self-managed utility? And that's exactly what's before the PUC.
Okay. And may I ask one last follow-up? Thank you. And that is just when a case is made comparing kilowatt hour costs at facility X versus Y versus Z, does the PUC have the ability to look more deeply than just those kilowatt hour costs? I mean, for instance, if one facility was much more at a higher level of productivity, for instance, it could be that those productivity costs would be more important to the bottom line than the cost of power. So can the PUC look beyond just electric costs when it tries to evaluate the competitive position of any particular company that's claiming that this market does not favor them in terms of competition?
So I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but you really need to speak with legislative counsel. But again, as a clinical expert in the area, I think the PUC's got very broad authority in coming to the determination under Section 231, which is, as you wrote, as you cited a moment ago, is whether the business will promote the general good of the state. So that would be item one. There is a lot of decisional law under Section 231 that the PUC has promulgated over years. They have a very detailed list of criteria that they review. Forgive me, I don't recall them all off the top of my head right now, but I have to think that in one of those criteria, there is something that speaks to the point that you're making. And if not, it would appear to be well within their purview to adopt such a criteria for this purpose, given the novel nature of the case, because all of the criteria that they've developed so far under Section 231 has been criteria of their making under Section 231. Under Section 249, as I recall, there's a catch-all provision at the end of those criteria that says any other relevant criteria that the PUC wants to consider. And when they're developing an evidentiary record as an expert quasi-judicial body, it's well within their purview to roam wide to find relevant evidence. But at the end of the day, I don't think the analysis turns so much on comparing the productivity costs of the company against its energy costs as much as it turns on comparing our consumers better off with Global Foundries remaining in Vermont and making the payments that are contemplated under this agreement, among these being the substantial payments they make toward regional network services costs and for regional grid purposes. It's something like $3 million a year. Are consumers better off with that contribution, or are they better off having the facility shutter and leave? That's I think the pivotal analysis on that point, and it's well within the PUC's purview to assess that.
Well, thank you very much for the questions. I think the tough, I was so with you all the way along till the last thing, shudder and leave, makes me shudder. It's like we're always over a barrel on this question.
I'm glad. I'm always glad to be in your company, Senator Bray. So I hope you're not with me or not with me, because I'm not making a case here.
Yeah.
I'm trying to answer your questions, but Global Foundries and GMP are going to have to make that case.
All right. So there's the cat commenting. I think my time's up. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. I'm losing my order here. I believe it was Senator Sirotkin and then Senator Hardy.
And I'm last.
Oh, and you're last. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry, Senator, you're on mute.
You're muted, Mike.
Would somebody stop stepping on that poor cat?
Thank you. So I'm going to be brief. While I appreciate the cross-examination of Senator Bray, and I do appreciate the forthright approach of the commissioner, I think this whole line of questioning is going in dangerous territory because as neutral as the commissioner said, she had given many comments to open the door to the public service, public utility commissioner to come back with her testimony here today. And she saying it would be reasonable for the commission to go this way, to factor in the closing of the plant. And that may be an argument that somebody else would say is unreasonable. And now we have the commissioner on record in several places whereby, as neutral as she tried to be, has opened the door to the Public Utility Commission saying, even the person who's there representing consumers has said, if we decide in that way, that's something that we have to balance. So I don't think we should, the one thing I do agree with is we need to hear from our counsel. And the one question I have is, do we have any ability at this point, other than writing letters to the Public Utility Commission in terms of process? And maybe this is just a question for our counsel again, to either intervene in this case, to file an amicus brief in this case. I don't know what our position would be, but that's something we need to ask of our counsel. I don't know whether there are consumer groups. The deadline may have passed, but maybe there are waivers to deadlines based upon lack of notice or hardship or whatever. Another question for our counsel. I don't know if our counsel is here, but I think it was a
Having
mistake.
trouble finding out who our counsel might be.
Well, in the first instance, I think it would probably be Maria. But, to the extent we want to hire outside counsel, that might be another question we have. I think we put the commissioner, as forthright as she's been, we put her in a tough position to ask these kinds of questions in a case that's in litigation right now, no matter how neutral she tried to be.
Well, Senator, I very much appreciate those remarks. I feel compelled in the spirit of that candor and good faith to ask you to have a look at 30 VSA 218E, specifically subsection 1, because it is a matter of statutory law that, I can read it. To give effect to the policies of section 202A, which are your energy policies, to provide reliable and affordable energy and assure the state's economic vitality, it is critical to retain and recruit manufacturing and other businesses and to consider the impact on manufacturing and other businesses when issuing orders, adopting rules, and making other decisions affecting the cost and reliability of electricity and other fuels. Implementation of the state's energy policy should, 1, encourage recruitment and retention of employers, providing high-quality jobs and related economic investment, and support the state's economic welfare, and 2, appropriately balance the objectives of this section with other policy goals and criteria established in this title. That is statute, and that is what the PUC is charged with administering. So I respect the fact that you may not feel I'm being entirely neutral, but I just want to point out that that's what I'm citing to.
I am not saying you're not neutral. I am saying that you've highlighted some factors to look at, and it would be well within their reason to do that. There may be precedential language in other decisions and in other statutes that may not have been read in total to this committee. And I feel like it could, I'm not even saying what our position is, but if our position is against this, I have a feeling that those words that you just read again will come back to us. Not that they're not in statute and not that the PUC can't read it themselves, but that you highlighted those to us. So
I'm,
Madam Chair.
I just think we should end this conversation.
Yeah.
I
Madam
think
Chair,
we
this
should
is
end this.
inappropriate.
I
Yeah.
am not going to have time to stage a legal case out of this committee. I think the concerns being the real energy renewable projects and requirements. I think this would be better held over in natural resources and energy, because that's where, that beginning locus is. And if they, if they have the time to do this, but this committee, if we're going to get broadband out of here by next week, along with several other bills, we can take this up afterwards, but we are not going to have time to do what it sounds like would be launch a legal proceeding. I haven't heard that there's any way we can say this is not legit, but
Well, Madam Chair, I think we should have, as soon as possible, Maria in and answer the questions of what
okay.
procedures. are
My
open.
understanding is, I think we asked Ellen, who was here.
Okay, Al, whatever.
Well, she does energy.
Well, we're talking
and
rates as well as energy here.
So I think we will see if we can find out if there's a ledge council who feels that they are. Do you want to say something, Ellen? You lit yourself up.
I hope not.
I have been tapped as the ledge council who will handle this issue.
Okay, lucky you.
And so I am happy if any of the senators here would like to send me some questions. I have been listening. So.
And I assume you haven't had time to do a deep dive into this issue.
I have begun researching. I would like more time. It is fairly complicated.
Getting that.
So I can
Okay.
address a couple of the things potentially, but I do think much of what has already been presented by the commissioner covers a lot of the things I may say. And as Senator Sirotkin was saying, I am hesitant also to make definitive statements either way on some of the issues that have come up because of the proceeding.
Okay.
Madam
Senator,
Chair,
okay, I've got Senator Hardy, but Senator McDonald is having apoplexy over here. Can you cede to him for 2 minutes, Senator McDonald?
you owe me, Mark, but
Madam-
sure, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I am very uncomfortable about the neutral witness that we just had, who on 3 occasions has read into the record what appears to be what it appears to be. And this is the research into whether or not the PUC should have taken this up is going to go back into legislative history and whatever. This is similar to what, if you permit me, Madam Chair, to after the sale of Vermont Yankee, when on 3 separate occasions, the legislature was asked to make decisions, and 3 separate times we were told that we had failed to read the contract for the sale, and 3 times we said to the Commissioner, Department of Public Service, well, you didn't tell us. We've asked you many, many times to tell us what's been going on and what's possible, and we were not told. And that made for some interesting press at one point.
Ellen is
you will
going to
recall.
tell us what is possible.
And she's should perhaps take her time about it and look into the historical record. I will end, Madam Chair, by staying away from the legal things and saying all of us as parents have had kids that have come to us and said, Mom or Dad, can I do such and such? And the first question that we ask after we learn our lessons is, well, have you asked your mother? And the child says, well, yes, I did. And what did your mother say? Well, your mother said no. So why are you coming to ask me? And the legislature said no on this question when IBM came in several years ago. And like any child, it appears that they've gone to ask the other parent, and the other parent didn't do us the courtesy of, saying, well, did you ask the legislature first?
Okay,
So
and on the
that's where
first
we are, and
issue,
that's where
it was
I will
another
stop.
company that came to
That's-
the legislature,
And
not
I-
Global Foundries.
They came with the same issue. So I will
Different
stop there,
company.
but that I will
Okay.
stop there, and that's where we are. And anything we say now and the commissioner says is on the record as an opinion, and
Right.
let her make her case somewhere else. So,
Okay, Senator Hardy,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
thank you for yielding.
thank you, Senator Hardy.
Sure. I feel like my colleagues are having a hard time with separation of powers, but I have a question. I mean, I think the two concerns that I had are the environmental concerns, which I agree are more of an issue for the Natural Resources Committee. And I think the, Commissioner was good to point out that the generally applicable laws question, and I would just urge my colleague in the Natural Resources Committee to consider that. But my other concern is about ratepayers. And I know that you, Mr. Porter, your job is to advocate for ratepayers. And so I wondered if you could just, as however you feel comfortable, talk about what you would be doing in order to advocate for ratepayers, or is that crossing a line that you don't feel comfortable with? Because I'm assuming that if you take out one of the biggest ratepayers from a company, the rates for everybody else could potentially go up. That's just math. But do you feel comfortable, or is that crossing a line? I don't want to put anyone in uncomfortable position.
I can answer a little bit, and Jean can kick me if I say something I shouldn't. But for the record, I'm Jim Porter, Director for Public Advocacy with the department. And you'll remember, I think Commissioner Sarah Hoffman came in and talked to this committee a few weeks ago, kind of about what the role was for a ratepayer and a public advocate. In this case, I think very simply, Global Foundries is about 8% of the electric use in the state. And so if they disappeared tomorrow, that would have an impact on Green Mountain Power ratepayers. Just them, it would probably be a 2 to 3% immediate rate increase. So that's a fundamental issue. And just can I tell you just a little bit about how our process works with a case like this, or any case? So this petition comes in, and we have different divisions within the department. And so and depending upon the case, all of those divisions will participate in the team that looks at the case. So in this instance, we have our efficiency division, our energy planning division, finance and economics, and engineering. And I think they'll all be a part of the review of this. And so to something Senator Cummings and Senator Hardy brought up, the first question I heard was, what happens with RES with this? All of those issues will be very much vetted by the department, and then will, become our position. In the petition, there is an agreement between Green Mountain Power and Global Foundries that over a 4-year period, it would sort of be a transitional, I think everyone's referring to it as a glide path right now. The idea of protecting the ratepayers from this transaction, that's certainly a big piece of it. And then in this case, the environmental pieces will also be looked at, and we'll take a position on that. And if I could just say one thing that may or may not be helpful. and I'm not talking about this case or any position on it, but we have people file petitions, and I will read the petition and say there's no jurisdiction for the board to even hear, the commission to even hear this case. That said, sometimes those cases go through hearings, and it takes the commission to say, yeah, we don't have jurisdiction. So, and I'm not saying that the PUC doesn't have jurisdiction in this case, but I just want to reiterate at this point, we have a petition before us that was filed a couple of weeks ago. The process is just getting started. Over the next 6 months, it will be fully vetted, because this is a big deal of a transaction in a lot of quarters. So I can tell you all those things will be looked at, and then everyone will know what our position is from our testimony.
Okay.
Is
So
that helpful at all?
You'll be doing the analysis on the impact on ratepayers, like doing the math, basically.
Well, fortunately, I won't be, but our economics division will be, absolutely.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, committee, some of us are late for our next meeting. So I think we've heard what there is to hear today. Gives us stuff to think about. Senator Pearson, do you have a last question?
Just on my way out, I hope the department will have some way of analyzing whether or not it's a real threat. We heard testimony that 85% of the world's cell phones have chips made in Essex, Vermont. That suggests to me that business is doing well, and it would be a mistake, I think, to just accept the validity of that threat and then examine the case. And so it's very much my hope that we would at least have some analysis on whether or not the threat is real.
Senator Pearson, I'm sorry, Jim, I was just going to say, we've reached out to the Agency of Commerce and Community Development for that very reason.
And the one thing I would add too, just very quickly, anytime there's a big case, there are conditions for approval recommended by the department and frequently ordered by the commission if they are approved. So a petition, particularly in a large proceeding, rarely, if it gets approved exactly as it's asked for, if that helps at all.
Senator Bray.
Very brief. I just want to, I think it's important for me to state, I'm entirely open. I'm asking questions, and some people might think of them as in some way contrary. All I'm saying is I'm entirely open-minded on the proceeding. I'm just asking questions to learn more. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, committee. Thank you, Commissioner, Mr. Porter, Alan, for jumping into the breach. And we will see everybody tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday. We're going to go back in large part to 360 tomorrow and walk through that side by side and the decision points and starting to see what we can lay to rest as we try and get 360 out of here as quickly as possible. At least decide on probably some money issues. So thank you all. We'll see everybody. Ellen?
Just quickly, if any of the members of this committee have questions, please email me. We can chat. I have done research, so I have also been following the case on EPUC. There are some other parties that have moved to intervene. There was a scheduling conference last week, and there are potentially more parties that will intervene. And there is going to be a public hearing on this in the coming up soon. So there will be more information. And if any of my clients want to chat with me about it, we can chat.
This is not a done deal, in other words. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. We will